You know what?
What?
They're actually here for you, not me.
I know.
My father-in-law is a wonderful man. He's an extremely talented artist, kind, considerate, and he's understanding. He's an intelligent, well-informed person who keeps up to date with what's happening in the world, and I can say for certain that he cares about everyone and wishes for no one to suffer due to who they are or their situation. He's also environmentally conscious, believes that climate change is real, and recognizes that corporations are entities that only care about profits, even if that means exploiting workers and resources. He has a single vice though: Coca-Cola. Every now and then, my father-in-law enjoys a single can of Coca-Cola, and has done so for years now. I've had numerous discussions with him about politics and how it can be hard to enjoy anything when you're aware that somewhere down the line someone has suffered for its production or procurement. The Coca-Cola company has had, to put it lightly, a spotty history. They've allegedly tortured and killed coke workers and union leaders in Colombia, polluted water resources in El Salvador, and exploited child labor. My father-in-law is aware of all this and is rightfully disgusted, but he still drinks Coca-Cola. So how can he do that, knowing that the Coca-Cola company has done and still does so many awful things and downright evil things? Well, he says that he isn't okay with it, but Coca-Cola is his one vice, and even if he were to buy from other companies, chances are they'll also have something objectionable about them. It's hard to enjoy anything that you buy from a store because most products involve some form of exploitation. He doesn't excuse the Coca-Cola company, but amidst the chaos of the world, sometimes he just wants to enjoy something that gives him comfort. And for him, it's a can of Coke. I enjoy Coca-Cola myself, especially vanilla Coke, but it gives me heartburn, so I can go without. However, the more I've learned about the world and the further I've entered adulthood, it's become increasingly apparent that it's nearly impossible for anyone to live a truly virtuous life. Even if you try your hardest, the best you can do is mitigate damage. You might decide to buy your fruits and vegetables from a local farmer's market, and that farmer may have driven that produce there in an electric vehicle that doesn't spew environment-harming carbon monoxide, but the battery in that car could be made using cobalt mined in the DRPC using child labor. In fact, it probably does, since it's so common and the world's demand for it is so high. In fact, the device that you're watching this on right now probably is the result of it, since companies like Apple use the same supply chain. As Santa Claus once said, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and he's correct. A lot of people use this reasoning to justify having a lack of convictions though, believing that since there's no other way of doing things better, then we may as well just accept it for what it is, and those with convictions are being childish and wasting their time. I personally don't believe this, since convictions are generally a good thing to have, but what about when it comes to the media we consume? Let me tell you about two of my all-time favorite sitcoms, 30 Rock, created by Tina Fey, and Arrested Development by Mitch Hurwitz. 30 Rock and Arrested Development are both products of the 2000s and contain some of the best written comedy ever made with an impeccable main cast. 30 Rock lasted for 7 seasons, and I would argue didn't have a single bad episode. I would even go as far as to say that the show only got better as it went along, which is rare for a sitcom. Arrested Development had 2 perfect seasons, one great one, and a couple of duds once Netflix bought the rights to it, but those first 3 seasons were so great that to this day it's still considered peak comedy. Despite showing their age, both of these shows have held up extremely well. There's a few bits of dated referential humor in them, but it's nevertheless still effective. I do and always will think that 30 Rock and Arrested Development are brilliant, but that doesn't mean that I believe they're perfect, and I wouldn't be the first to say that. While these products are worthy of praise, they've also aged poorly in numerous ways, but to be more specific, they're products of their era. Arrested Development was first aired back in 2003 when audience sensibilities were different, and the kind of jokes writers could get away with included certain jokes that they couldn't do now. Arrested Development may have been a very funny and witty show, but it wasn't above making jokes at the expense of others, specifically vulnerable groups. The show most commonly made gay jokes involving the character Tobias Funke. While Tobias was a very funny character and seen as the butt of every joke, as the show went on it seemed to lean more and more into the idea of him being a repressed gay man. The crux of every joke was, isn't it funny that Tobias did or said something that's considered gay? During this era, jokes at the expense of LGBTQ plus people were the norm, whether that was in movies or TV shows. Writers and audiences felt that queerness or transness is a source of comedy because it's different and unfamiliar to them. And when something is unfamiliar or even seen as weird, it can be treated as a valid target for derision by those who don't understand why that's a problem. Arrested Development also made jokes at the expense of trans people, homeless people, people of color, and its third season went heavy on ableist humor with the character Rita, played by Charlize Theron, who is at first believed to be a quirky British woman, is eventually revealed to be someone with intellectual disabilities. To communicate this to others, she wears a bracelet that the other characters at first believe says Mr. F, but they later find out that it means mentally blank female. To say the show hasn't aged well is a bit of an understatement, really. These jokes don't define the series as a whole, but it's definitely a case of a show that got away with things then that it couldn't do now. Would it suffer without these jokes? I don't believe so personally, since it's held up by a lot of great and easier to stomach jokes, but I guess you have to question whether it's okay to enjoy the whole product given its glaring flaws. 30 Rock has a similar problem. While it is hilariously written, it suffers from the same faults of its era. One of the show's most poorly aged elements is its character Paul, who cross-dresses as one of the other characters, Jenna Maroney. The fact that Paul is a cross-dresser isn't the problem, it's the fact that he, and I'm using the pronoun he because that's how they address him, is used as a vehicle for transphobic humor. There's a variety of offensive pronoun usages, like Paul being referred to as a schman, references to his anatomy, and it leans into the appalling stereotype of trans people being treated as sexual deviants, since he and Jenna engage in a variety of obscene acts. 30 Rock, along with some other shows, has had a handful of episodes removed from streaming services too. Back in 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protests, which gained worldwide attention, companies and corporations were put in a position where they couldn't remain silent on such an important issue anymore, and they felt they had to accept responsibility for potentially contributing to discrimination. As a response to this, streaming services like Hulu, Netflix, Max, and others deleted existing episodes that contained racially insensitive content, which typically meant characters dressed up in blackface or some other variation. 30 Rock had 4 episodes removed, each of which contained some form of blackface, and other shows including Scrubs, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, The Office, and Community did too. Community was an interesting case though, since it was an episode in which the group played Dungeons & Dragons, and Ken Jeong painted his face to look like a dark elf, a race in the game with black skin. But to this day, you can still watch the Season 3 episode, The First Chang Dynasty, in which Pierce, played by Chevy Chase, dresses up as an Indian Swami, complete with brownface. Yvette Nicole Brown, who played Shirley in Community and a black woman, even went so far as to say that she felt that the removal was an overcorrection and that most people would be able to understand the distinction. I guess the question is, should all of these episodes have been removed? Does it make a difference in the world whether they're seen by fresh eyes or revisited by people who've already seen them? Well, if there's one thing that we all know by now, it's that many companies like to portray themselves as caring and empathetic towards society. It's the same reason why so many ads about social issues went viral, probably the most famous being Gillette's ad about toxic masculinity, and the most infamous being the Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner, which was swiftly taken off the air because of how horribly embarrassing it was. On one hand, yes, these portrayals are universally inappropriate and offensive. It's easy to excuse them by saying that it was a different time and comedic sensibilities were edgier back then, but that doesn't make it okay. It was insensitive then and it's insensitive now. We as a society have just become more vocal about racist humor being wrong. Removing the episodes feels more like a band-aid than anything else. It's an entity saying that it's not right to allow such offensive things to exist, but art is in many ways a time capsule. It's something that can represent a specific moment and give us an insight on what people were like during different eras. Erasing the objectionable parts of art makes the whole of it feel less honest and sometimes incomplete. Can these offensive episodes still cause harm? Potentially, yes, since there are people who go out of their way to watch it and find hilarity in jokes at the expense of minorities and vulnerable people. You could even go as far as to say that it causes harm by financially contributing to the companies that distribute the content, thus communicating that it's something that people want more of. After all, for a business, profits come ahead of all else. Given how our sensibilities have changed though, and how younger generations such as Gen Zs and Millennials are able to quickly recognize problematic content, there's an argument to be made that these episodes could have been left in place and audiences would be able to apply their own knowledge, allowing them to recognize not only whether something is problematic, but whether they should dismiss the entire product as a result. None of us are perfect, apart from me, of course. And art has to be created by one or more people, and those people have their own views of the world, which inevitably makes its way into the art that they produce. In literary theory, there's the idea of the death of the author, which means that once a text is in the hands of the audience, what that text ultimately means is the responsibility of them and not the creator of them. This theory was introduced by French philosopher Roland Barthes in 1967, but thanks to technology, the world is a very different place compared to back then. Before the internet, the amount of information a person had on an artist was extremely limited compared to now. They might have had some TV or print interviews, but that was just a slither of their personality and beliefs. Thanks to social media, for better or worse, creators get to share their thoughts and beliefs as much as they want on sites like Twitter 24 hours a day, and some of them can really take advantage of that. They can interact with their audience, get feedback for future creations, and share their opinions on basically anything. This is sadly where I have to talk about the author of the Harry Potter series, J.K. Rowling. I'm not happy about it too. Believe me. For many years, the fans of the Harry Potter series enjoyed being able to interact with the author, who has undoubtedly had a great deal of influence on people's lives and childhoods. JK shared her insights and inspirations that went into the creation of the series and provided additional details about characters that were left out of the book. Although sometimes it was kind of bollocks, to be honest with you. Like the time that she said she never said Hermione was white, even though she explicitly did. In recent years, though, Rowling has become insistent on ruining any goodwill that she's gained from her fans over the years by sharing her blatantly transphobic opinions and has refused to accept any criticism for it, regardless of how valid it may be. She's also aligned herself with figures and groups that have similar sentiments. I don't think it's too surprising though, given that not only is Rowling a British person that's past the age of 45, which is like the main transphobe demographic for some reason, Rowling is also immensely wealthy, influential, and beloved by millions of people across the world since she created a series of books that meant so much to them. People with wealth and influence are naturally inclined to reject criticism. It's hard for us average people to understand, but When a person is in a position in which the world has rewarded you so handsomely for being you, the concept of being challenged becomes a foreign idea to them. They've spent years being told that they've done so much good, so it's easy for them to believe that their opinions and beliefs hold more value than a stranger on the internet, regardless of the validity of that stranger's statement. For a lot of Harry Potter fans, this put them in a difficult position. Millions of people who grew up reading Harry Potter books, watching the movies, and playing the video games, they literally helped form people into who they are. But now, for those who disagreed with Rowling, of which there were many, they found themselves in a difficult position. They had to ask themselves, can I truly enjoy this series, knowing what the author believes in? And some even felt bad about the fact that this series held such a special place in their hearts, while knowing it was made by a person who denies people of their identity. When the game Hogwarts Legacy was released, many fans of the series were put in a difficult position. This was a high-profile release that received a ton of critical acclaim, so for those who loved the series, it had a tremendous amount of appeal. For those who opposed Rowling's point of view, though, it became a difficult choice. Do you stick with your convictions and not play it? Play it while holding on to your convictions but potentially be judged by others, or abandon your convictions for the sake of enjoying something? The game came out and it was a massive commercial success, becoming the highest selling game of the year, so evidently any kind of boycotting that was in place didn't leave a significant dent. Then there were people who justified buying the game with limp, overused arguments, essentially implying that people who have convictions are losers. They said things like, if you're boycotting the game, then why aren't you boycotting bookstores and Universal Studios? If you really cared, then you'd be doing all that. It's the equivalent of people saying, if you're against climate change, then why do you have a car? So, in a situation like this, can you simply detach the author from the product? I suppose if you want to mitigate harm, then the answer is to simply not support the author, but I think there's an argument to be made for letting people enjoy something even if it's tinged with guilt. I'll get to that though. If we're being real though, the Harry Potter series has had plenty of objectionable stuff. The greedy goblin bankers with hooked noses, werewolves who mirror gay panic stereotypes, the name of non-white characters like Cho Chang. I mean, really? Cho Chang? What would you call the Muslim character, Joanne? Ramadan Patel? Personally, I've never been a fan of Harry Potter though. Dragon Ball Z is way better. There are inverses of this scenario though, where the works of the author have aged poorly, but their views have evolved. One prime example is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia by Rob McElhenney and Glenn Howerton. Sunny was first aired back in 2005 and is still going to this day, making it the longest running live-action American sitcom of all time. In its early days, Sunny was a prime example of mid-2000s edgy humor. It used what's often referred to as meta-bigotry, which is a style of humor where jokes that were racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. were considered acceptable on the grounds of the audience not taking them as fact. It sounds kind of weird saying it out loud, but the gist of it is that I know this is a bad thing, but it's funny because it's shocking. So a person could believe that something like a racial stereotype isn't true, but feel that it's okay to laugh at a racist joke because of that. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia's earlier seasons were filled to the brim with edgy, offensive jokes at the expense of marginalized groups, with one episode title even containing an ableist slur. There were times where characters pretended to have intellectual disabilities, wore blackface, were homophobic, and one of its most egregious inclusions was the treatment of the character Carmen. The character Mac is revealed to be dating Carmen, who is a trans woman. The gang doesn't refer to her as Carmen though. Instead, she gets called by a well-known transphobic slur, which I absolutely won't be repeating. Jokes were made about her anatomy. Mac was ridiculed for being physically intimate with Carmen, largely because she hadn't received bottom surgery. Him dating Carmen led the gang to suspect that Mac is gay, and on occasions they asked her directly about her transition in offensive ways. A lot of comedies from the 2000s have aged very poorly, but in many respects, Sunny has aged like milk left in a hot car, and the treatment of Carmen is just one of the many reasons. However, the creators of the show have since grown as people and admitted that their treatment of Carmen was wrong. In an interview with Showbiz Cheat Sheet, Rob McElhenney said, "Carmen, who's transgender on the show, but we called her something else, we referred to her in a derogatory term, which at the time we didn't recognize was derogatory, and that's our fault and ignorance, because we didn't do our homework and reach out to the community to find out. We just assumed that it was appropriate to call this person this derogatory term. Then in subsequent years, we realized no, it was hurtful and it was cruel. We can't retroactively go back and change what we've done, but what we can do is when we introduce her again in subsequent episodes, we can change the vernacular." It's not easy recognizing or admitting to your ignorance, and a lot of people choose to take new information as direct criticism of their character. It's the same reason why when people are told that they're doing something racist, they'll deflect it by saying something like, "I can't be racist, I have a black friend." Knowing that the creators of Sunny have changed their points of view over the years and learned why some of the jokes they've made throughout the series are actually derogatory, those episodes still exist and they're not easier to stomach. A lot of writers, especially in the field of comedy, haven't been so accepting though. Many stand-up comedians who were popular around the 90s and 2000s regularly lament how PC culture has stifled comedy to the point where it's difficult to write a joke without offending people. These comedians are generally known for their edgy humor, some adopting that form of meta-bigotry with jokes based around gender, sexual orientation, race, ability, and so on. But to say that it's too hard to write an inoffensive joke is just a poor excuse. Audience sensibilities change over the years, not just in respect to what's considered tasteless, and the job of a comedian is to change with the times. Comedians can't blame the audience for not laughing because it's not the audience's responsibility to laugh. If they don't laugh, then that's the fault of the comedian. But some of these comics have developed such a large ego that they simply can't accept that they're the problem. It's like if a chef served expired food to a diner and they complain, and the chef responds to it by saying, "Your palate isn't refined enough to enjoy it." Comedy evolves, and comedians have to evolve with it. Frankie Boyle used to have one of the most offensive, edgiest acts out there, but he's since changed, retaining his shock humor but not punching down. Same with Patton Oswalt. He's been going since the 90s and he's still great without resorting to targeting vulnerable people. Offensive and shocking comedy can exist in its own space though, and it lives on through satire. One notable example being HBO's Veep, created by British comedy legend Armando Iannucci. Veep revolves around Selina Meyer, the Vice President of the US, and her staff. It's about her ambitions and failures, and it genuinely is a brilliant look at how American politics are a corrupt mess. But most of all, it illustrates how the country is led by self-serving, privileged people who don't care about the needs of the public. These are some of the worst people in the world, and unsurprisingly, they say some pretty offensive things. The show is explicit about how you shouldn't be on their side or even sympathize with them despite their flaws, since they have no moral compass to speak of. When a crass joke is delivered, it serves to show you how terrible they are, but the humor comes from being disgusted and witnessing their failures. It's edgy, but it exists with a purpose. When it comes to older sitcoms, you'll often hear the refrain, "You couldn't get away with that these days," and one popular example is the US version of The Office, given that it contains a variety of jokes that contain outdated verbiage or sentiments. However, the show is still popular, and, personally, I would argue that it would be possible to make it, because it was never intended to be offensive. The majority of poor taste content in The Office is delivered by Michael Scott, who's portrayed as an out-of-touch person, and the cast never responds positively to his offensive humor. The writers never intended for us to laugh with Michael Scott, and that should be obvious to anyone that watches the show. It's funny watching this man ostracize himself by being so insensitive and oblivious to his faults, but by no means is he supposed to be agreed with. Offensive comedy is still possible, it just has to be done right. There are audiences who do miss edgy humor though, and like to believe that if something is a joke, then it can't be criticized regardless of how harmful it is, but that's not acceptable. Jokes still contain a nugget of truth, and there are people who do take them seriously. Right-wing people in particular have taken to protesting censorship in comedy, among many other things, claiming that comedians should be allowed to joke about anything and that by restricting them, then comedy can't reach its full potential. In response to this, some right-wing comedians and media producers have taken to creating their own content separate from the mainstream, with a heavy emphasis on politically incorrect humor. The initiative to create counterculture comedy hasn't been very successful though, and isn't anywhere close to entering the mainstream. Not only have the creators chosen to ignore being politically correct, they've leaned into being as offensive as possible and being transparently cruel towards certain groups. One example was the movie Lady Ballers, written, directed, and starring Daily Wire CEO Jeremy Boring, who I'm sure lives up to his last name very well. It's a story about a group of cis men who enter the world of women's sport while claiming to be trans women. They end up defeating all of their women opponents in an attempt to illustrate the ludicrous idea that men have a natural advantage over women in sport and that there's a possibility that people will fake their gender to win. It's a crass, offensive, and uninformed critique on a subject that the writers were clearly willingly ignorant about. And to top it all off, it's not even funny. Unless you believe that a man dressing up as a woman by wearing a cheap wig while making goofy faces is the height of comedy. Right-wingers just aren't very good at comedy in general, and that's largely because it's fueled by vitriol towards people who stand out from the rest of the world, who in their eyes aren't considered normal, and that their refusal to adapt to what the world expects from them is something that should make them a target. But some people loved it, and I'm sure you can imagine who those people are and why they would find something like Lady Ballers funny. And look, I know that humor is subjective. If you watched the movie and found it hilarious and you just think that I don't like it because I don't agree with you ideologically, you would be wrong. Even if you do desire comedy that openly mocks vulnerable people, which I don't think you should, obviously, I'm sure you could do better than this trash. People change, and the times change. What could have been considered acceptable back in the 2000s might be unthinkable now, and the people who create the media that we love are humans with all sorts of faults. Just like us though, they can change or stay stuck in their ways. Whether you enjoy something or not, I think depends on how you enjoy it. When I think back on the time when I was much younger and originally watched and enjoyed shows like Arrested Development and 30 Rock, there were probably some jokes that I laughed at and really should have known better, but the sensibilities of those eras taught me that it was okay to laugh, even when it's a joke at the expense of someone who didn't deserve it. Now, when I rewatch these shows or anything that I haven't seen before with similar content, I don't find it funny. I find it cringy or downright appalling. They haven't aged well, and time has proven them to be wrong in their choices. In a way, though, it makes me think of the person I've become. I'm more tolerant than I used to be, more compassionate towards people, and understand that vulnerable people are especially deserving of compassion and support. They don't deserve to be mocked because of who they are, because some writer wants to offend or get a very cheap laugh. Because any comedian worth their salt will tell you, comedy requires effort. And if you're not willing to put in the effort, then you should probably leave the joke writing to someone else, someone who's better at it. Reckoning with a problematic author can be tricky though. As I mentioned earlier, if something is meaningful to you but you're opposed to the author's beliefs, then it can make your relationship with their creations tricky. How you wish to navigate that is really up to you, but I don't think we should always criticize someone if they want to enjoy something special to them, if they want to enjoy an occasional can of Coke. I think it's a problem when people develop ham-fisted arguments in favor of enjoying the works of problematic creators though, since it's ultimately self-serving and diminishes the value of having convictions. And, if I'm being real with you, if you really want to enjoy something without giving money to the creator or the company that produces it, then piracy is an option. Don't want to buy something from a AAA video game company that just laid off hundreds of its employees while announcing record profits to their shareholders? Then don't. Find it online, fire up BitTorrent and a reliable VPN, and before you know it, you've got yourself a guilt-free video game. The internet's got it all: movies, TV shows, music, you name it. You just have to know where to look. I've just been informed by my fictional lawyer that I should state that my previous statement was made for the purposes of comedy and was in no way an endorsement to illegally download anything. I also do not claim any responsibility for any legal action that is taken on you should you be caught pirating by the local authorities. So, as with everything, consume in moderation and with consideration of where something has come from and who made it. If you can enjoy something but also recognize its faults and why it has those faults, I believe that's ultimately a good thing, and you should take some pride in being so mindful. If, on the other hand, you prefer to avoid something entirely because of its faults, no matter how large or small, then that's your prerogative too. What matters is that we do better moving forward and try to evolve, and I think that media producers are, in general, doing a much better job than what they were doing 20 years ago, and that's because we, as an audience, have spoken and said that we don't want something that can be harmful towards others, even if it's sold to us under the guise of being entertainment or comedy. But I'd be happy to hear what you think about this tricky to navigate subject, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Be nice to each other, be well, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed yourself. Don't forget to like the video, and while you're at it, why not subscribe? It's been a slow year, so you'll be doing me a solid. Thanks to all the people you see on screen who support the channel via patreon.com/Salari, and I'd like to offer a special thanks to the following: Sumi, Sabo David, Freya, Lore, Quesadilla, Charlie, Rima, Rowan Ellis, Texas Lioness, Martin Chung, Femgirl Aaron, MD Bagel, Minty, Malcontent, Jacob Mayer, Zoe B, Fishcatch, Cuba XR, Mech, Jonathan Morris, Aria Rose, Bailey Grevling, Catherine Pandel, Remy Allen, Lizzie Peasy, Grant B, Enrique Gutierrez, Murger Fashionable, Alina, R. Atoms, Sparrowwagon, The Deer Prince, El Salvador Dali, Syndrome Noir, Tadeo de Oria, Ryan Osterman, Jay, Cami, Catherine, Nadine, Mr. Peepalop, Something Goofy, Carlin, Gina I, David, Jared S, Alexandra Vanka, Vertex, Emily Argentine, Lepaltism, Haplo, Emmett Selk's Gay Husband, Locked In, Boring AF, Kev U, Velox, Patrick Giuseppe, Gerd Sweinreich, and Selen. Thank you all so very much for your support, and to all those who pledged after the last video, I just want to say I'm overwhelmed by your compassion and kindness. It really helped during a very difficult time. I stream every week on YouTube. Most recently, I've been doing a playthrough of Silent Hill 2 Remake. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Salari, and I have a Discord server with lots of lovely people. I'm visiting my family in England in the next few days. It's been one hell of a year since my mum got diagnosed with cancer, then after treatment, thankfully got the all clear, but just a few weeks ago, my dad got stranded in Iran while visiting family. So yeah, a trip's overdue. Thanks again, and take care.